Hello and welcome to Trying Times. My name is Carmen, and if you're new here, then welcome. If you've listened before, then thank you. And an even bigger thank you for coming back and listening to yet another episode. I really appreciate you and your time. So if you saw the episode title, you're probably like, are you following up a miniseries you just did about TV shows and film with a miniseries about books? And my answer to that is yes. Yes, I am. I realized after working on that miniseries that I really enjoyed creating something like that and talking about something from a more subjective place as opposed to something that people can potentially relate to, which, don't get me wrong, I still love that. And that's still what this show is about. And it's still what encouraged me to create Trying Times. And it'll continue to be that, but just after a couple more episodes of this and this sort of thing. Okay. Anyways, I enjoyed reading a lot when I was younger. But I got out of it around the time I was in high school and then again in university, more so because in university there were so many classes that had so many readings. So I just couldn't be bothered to read after doing things that I had to do pretty much. And I think after all of that, my interest in it slowly peaked again. But more so when COVID had hit and we were all in quarantine, I was really back into it because it just felt like such a quiet time. And for the most part, everyone was at home, so it was a good time to pick up new hobbies and try out something that was relaxing or calming, and reading definitely became that for me. So I read mostly the same few genres. To start, I'll say, since this episode is about memoirs, memoirs were definitely not one of those that I particularly felt super drawn to. But I did always have a bit of curiosity about the genre, and I can say that I've never really tried reading many memoirs, being 100% honest here. But in the last couple of years, there have been some that I've actually felt more motivated to actually try reading. So I finally gave that a try. And surprisingly, I really enjoyed them. Very proud of myself for that. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about two memoirs that I've read recently and try not to give away too much about the story itself because that would just be like the biggest spoiler in the world. And if you've heard of either of these books and want to read them, I don't want to spoil them for you. So I'll try my best to talk a bit about the story, the voice it was written in, and then also my overall reaction I had to the book. All right, so the first one that I read was called I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. And I really hope I'm not butchering that. But yeah, that book, I'll start by saying, was a mission for me to actually track down and find a physical copy. And I think in the end, I ended up having to order it on Amazon because I just couldn't find it in a store near me. But I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki was written by Baek Si-hee. And I believe this book came out originally in Korean in 2018, but then was recently translated into English. So the story itself has been out for a while now, but I finally got to read it and I was very excited about it. And it basically works as a sort of therapy memoir that takes you through her life as a social media director at a publishing house. And she is seemingly quite successful on the outside, but internally she struggles a lot with self-doubt, with worry of judgment from others, and keeping up with everyday nuances. So the entire book follows a recalling of each of her therapy sessions over the course of, I think, 12 weeks. And then that is followed by a short essay that consists of some of her revelations or thoughts or general reactions from the session itself and how it might apply to her life in the following weeks. So to start, I just want to say that I've never read anything like this before, and I'm open to talking about therapy and have always been that way. So when I'd heard about this book, I was intrigued to read about someone else's experience, and not in a way that just glossed over sessions, but more so in a way where someone is struggling severely and in a way that people might actually be able to really relate to it, because I think that is so important. And I'll say that the honesty throughout the story is really incredible. And Baek doesn't hold back in sharing details, which I found really fascinating. So as each session was ending in the story, the reader is taken into this chapter, if you will, or like a short essay almost, which looks like a time of application where we see her try to take her learnings from therapy into her day-to-day. And her execution wasn't always perfect. It was usually far from, and I think that's what made me feel more drawn to the story in general, because the sheer honesty was not only so brave, but it was really moving to read about. And I think more often than not, I feel like the reader always hopes for the hero's success more than anything. And this story is one where you do have that feeling and continue to hope that for her. I ultimately felt that throughout this entire story, and even after the fact of having read the book. And at moments, it genuinely felt really sad to read her struggles and to be able to even relate in an even minor way, since her voice was so strongly vulnerable throughout the entirety of it all. But it was almost refreshing to read without having any kind of boundaries there. And I think the story had no boundaries of what could and couldn't be shared, which I personally found that a little shocking because I'm not so used to it, but almost a little comforting through and through, and kind of inspiring because someone was so willing to be open and honest about their experiences. So that's that for the first one. If you've read this story or want to read it, feel free to DM me on Instagram at the Trying Times Podcast to chat more about this, because I'd love to talk to someone else about it who's also read it, clearly, in case you can't tell by now. So that's all for that one. On to the second story and the second book I read. This one was a huge hit in the last year, and it's called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This book was one I read incredibly fast, but was also one that I felt like I needed to relax after having finished it. So going off of what I was just saying about honesty, this is one that will be brutally honest and covers a lot. So with this one, I'll give you a bit of a warning as it touches on a number of subjects, including abuse, trauma, and varying disorders. So it may not be easy for anyone to read, but if those topics specifically are difficult for you to read, then I would just like to start with that, because there's a lot covered here, and that may not be the best for someone who is struggling and can be triggered by those subjects. Right off the bat, the story was so vulnerably written, and even in the recalling of so many events, you could really hear Jeanette's voice, or I should say I could really hear it, because I was reading it and I felt like it was very prominent, and that struck me the most. It was really eye-opening to read about her experiences and her life, since she was someone that many watched growing up and looked to for a source of laughter or happiness as a whole. I did, I know for sure. So it was really eye-opening to be able to read about her experience. And I'll say in this, you get the full behind the scenes of what her life was actually like. To read that and then think back on how much her character on different shows cheered me up was incredibly mind-blowing. So the first thing I thought about was just, even in her lowest of low moments, she was still able to show up and do a job that allowed others to feel so much joy. And that gives me chills, because I think in certain scenarios, I know that this is how a handful of people in this sort of work field or industry may feel. And they're just so incredibly dedicated to their work and to their careers. And it's beautiful, but it's also concerning to a degree. So I think reading about Jeanette's life at work was one thing. And then when it touched on her life at home and her relationships on top of that, it felt genuinely shattering. That's the lightest way I can put it. Certain aspects of her struggles were relatable, but then it was just eye-opening again to read her struggles and also learn about her mind and her inner workings, sort of to say. And I think it's well known, or I would really hope it is well known, that Jeanette is an incredibly strong human being. She's faced unimaginable situations and has come out above them time and time again. And it's not always been that way, but she is so brave for sharing everything she shares and for just being honest about her experience and her life so far. Not only that, but I think, sharing your experience with the world is just a whole other level of strength. Her story has touched many in a way that I'm not sure she's realized it might have, or that she might have thought it would have while writing. But to some degree, I would hope that now she knows it resonates with many people, and the response to it seemed really shocking to her, but I think hopefully in the best way possible. Generally with this genre, and this book specifically, to write about your experiences, especially negative, and to share that with the world is one type of endurance, but then to have your voice be so prominent throughout the entirety of a story is just unmatched. So whether she was recalling something positive or negative, her voice was consistently shown, and it was a consistent tone throughout the whole book. And that aspect of her storytelling felt almost comforting and felt like what you would feel when you're confiding in a close friend. That feeling was really special and something that I hadn't felt before while reading a book. And I think that's generally what made this book really unforgettable for me. And I can't honestly recommend it enough. So there's that. Without getting sentimental, I got a little sentimental. But yeah, those are two of the memoirs that I've read recently. And I would absolutely recommend checking those out for different reasons, of course. If you want to try reading a memoir and haven't yet, I would suggest trying to read one of these because it might be a great look into that genre for you. I know for me it definitely was. They're both very vulnerably written by strong women and allow you to look into someone else's life through very clear lenses, even if their stories feel foggy at times. And I think since both these people are to some degree people that you can just search up on Google, it's truly interesting to read about them from their own perspective instead of semblances of their lives online. Their honesty and strength is admirable, and that's all I can say. I feel like I've said it so many times, but I just need to say it over and over again, I feel. And like I mentioned, it felt comforting at times to be able to relate to certain struggles and just to know that you're not alone. Ultimately, at the end of it, you're never alone, even if it feels like it. So yeah, if you've made it this far, I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate your time and energy. And if you want to talk about either of these books or even have a recommendation, then feel free to DM me on Instagram at the Trying Times Podcast or leave me a voicemail by clicking the link in the episode description. So that's all for today. We'll chat again soon, okay? Bye.